friend of mine years ago, and we were talking about what it would be like to be there on the day that Jesus was crucified.
Yes.
The smell of blood and sweat in the air, the confused onlookers. What would it have been like? And he reminded me, Josh, you would have been holding the hammer. And that's true. All of us would be holding the hammer. Mel Gibson, the Catholic filmmaker, in his classic now, The Passion of the Christ, is eminently recognizable. Everybody knows who Mel Gibson is. He could have raised the status of the movie by being in it. Absolutely. Everybody knows who he is. Everybody knows he's all messed up and crazy things. He's also deeply loves Jesus. He only appears in one scene, and that's his hand. And that's the only scene he wanted to do in the movie The Passion. He's not in the credits. You never find him. You have to dig around. That's where it starts. And those who know that they would be holding the hammer are ahead of the rest of us.
Amen.
This is easy to forget in a changing world. Christianity was a dominant religion for a long time in the West, several centuries. Most of you remember a time when everyone you knew went to church. It was just a matter of which one. My kids won't grow up in that world. There will be a wide diversity of different worldviews in the air, different perspectives, and the traditional Christian one will become a minority. Now, can we learn from this here not to view the rest of the world with fear and bitterness? Can we learn to be thankful we know Christ as we do, rather than judgmental of the rest of the world who may not?
Amen.
The saved hostage doesn't judge those who are still imprisoned. He aches for them. He prays for them.
Yes.
He's grateful every moment he is rescued. Let that be our perspective.
Amen.
Remember that Jesus' strongest words were for the most religious people. Jesus' strongest words were for the religious people. This is why I like hanging out with addicts, those who have looked in the face of death and complete loss and know that every blessing in their lives is just that.
Amen.
Extra. And they live with a certain freedom, knowing what it's like to lose everything, knowing that they're just as capable as evil as anyone else.
Yes.
And Jesus says here that he has come to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And that's an important historical piece as well. We'll look at that phrase, very heavy with meaning, and what it could have sounded like to the original leaders. Leviticus 25:10. Leviticus 25:10. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty through the land to all its inhabitants. And it shall be a jubilee year for you. Each of you is to return to your family, property, and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow, do not reap, but grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee, it is to be holy. Eat only what is directly taken from the field. And this is what was called the Jubilee year. And in the Jubilee year, all property was returned to its original owners, and the land rested from being cultivated. Those who had become indentured servants because of their poverty, who had to sell themselves into slavery, were freed in that year. It was a year of liberation, of returned property, and of simplicity. They only lived what grew off the land. They were not to work the land and destroy it, trying to get what they wanted. And this would be a simpler time when wealth and competition would all be at a lull because everyone was living under the same rules. The year of Jubilee, the time when everything restarted, and those who were in prison were released. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. A very strict and serious part of being God's people as well. The Sabbath day and the Sabbath years just pointed to that Jubilee year, which pointed to the great Jubilee beyond. It was an integral part of what it meant to be Israel. And I think here that it's fascinating that rest was just as important as work. What we saw last week is that Jesus created wine, the symbol and lubricant of partying. It's his inaugural miracle. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. He proclaims the Sabbath rest as his inaugural address. So his inaugural miracle is to make wine. His inaugural address is to say, let's party. The first words we have recorded of him in Luke. We are God's people. You shall know us by our parties. When was the last time you heard that? We are God's people. You shall know us by our disciplines of feasting. Amen. And when I lived in Omaha, we used to have these fantastic dance parties. I was telling Marilyn about it. We'd get the music pumping, and the strobe lights, and the smoke machines. And there's some pretty embarrassing pictures of me floating around on the internet. I couldn't find any today, weirdest thing. But of me at the party doing, you know, the white man's butter churn or whatever I was doing. Just getting down, getting down, getting down, getting down. Inevitably, they were so great, and the music's pumping and there's smoke coming out of the house and lights and all this stuff, that people we didn't know would sort of drift in. And some people accidentally went to our party one time because they thought it was somebody else's party and they just stayed. But like, these things would happen. And we had this guy and this gal came in, they didn't know each other, and they're flirting across the dance floor, and this sort of mating ritual thing is going on, and it's just this, this hookup type thing, they start kissing and touching on the dance floor and whatever. And what had been a simple, safe time of us enjoying friendship and music was suddenly changed to this coolness, conquest, sophistication. They're out there doing their thing, and the girl was obviously uncomfortable. The guy was on the prowl. And so we just started bumping into him. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry for that. And then they left. And we sort of drove out this dynamic of using and conquering with simple joy. And that's what Jubilee is about. That's what Jubilee is about. And we drove that out, and we turned the music up, and we got down. Because that's what we did. Because we respected each other. We respected the girls there. We were being respectful and having a great time. And that's a completely silly example, but that is the idea here. Jesus is declaring that this is the time of joy. This is the time of release. This is the time of starting over from ground zero. And these overcomplicated, sin-infested ways of who owes what to who and who offended who and who's winning and losing need to be demolished. We're starting from scratch. Now, his original audience were not thrilled to hear this message. He goes on from there to give examples of the times when God delivered other nations instead of Israel. All those times he talks about. He says there were a lot of widows in Israel, but Elijah was called outside of Israel to save someone. And then he references Naaman the Syrian, who was healed of leprosy. Naaman was the commander of the enemy armies against Israel. The Jubilee and the releases he's declaring is not just for their release, but for the release of all of us from the most brutal tyrant there is, ourselves.
Amen.
So they take him to the edge of a cliff, and here he is again. Not long after looking down off the eave of the temple. Now he is looking down off the edge of a cliff. Again, this is the valley here that is extremely important because it's where Armageddon is. And whether that battle, as John describes, is meant to be a symbol or meant to be an actual battle, it is meant to be about when the end of things comes. Lots of emotion. And this is where the words of Psalm 91 that the devil had twisted did come true. Satan had tempted Jesus to show off, to advertise himself doing a stunt, and Jesus refused. And here Jesus is rescued, probably by angels, before his foot strikes the stone.
Thank you, Lord.
So, a few things to put in your pocket today. Number one, Jesus didn't come for those who think they have it all together, but for those who know they're broken.
Yes, amen.
We would be the one holding the hammer and the nail to his hand. And he knows that. And he's always known that. He knew that from the beginning. It's not a surprise to him. It's not a shock to him. He knew that always. Everything in life is extra. Every blessing we have is a gift.
Amen.
So let us be freshly grateful for what we do have.
Yes.
Second, keep your hands to yourself. In the same vein as God's people, we need to be gentle with those who don't call themselves Christians. Jesus gives several examples here of how God's mercy was shed on those who were outside of the chosen. He had his strongest words for the religious establishment, for the us, not the them. For the us, not the them. Let's continue to tell the truth in love. Let's continue to spread the gospel, but be known for our welcoming and hospitality. Be known for our feasting instead of how well we withdraw. Right? You want to be the guy who loves his neighbor, or the guy who doesn't swear when he hits himself with a hammer? I'd rather be the first guy.
Amen.
Because I am the second guy. Anyway. The year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee. Jesus declared the year of Jubilee. The year that has never stopped, in which we are released from our sin and guilt and shame. Do you need a year of Jubilee in your life?
Amen.
Is there something that you need to let go of?
Amen.
Some bitterness or rage against someone or against life itself?
Amen.
Let this be that year.
Yes.
Let this be the year when you claim God's peace and love against all odds. I'll never forget my dad's sermon on the day of our wedding. And I've forgotten everything else that people said, I think, that day. But my dad's sermon, one of the points he made that has always stayed with me, is when you are in an argument with your spouse, which never happens to us, we just heard about it, and you have that one thing that's going to take them down, that one thing that's going to just cut right to the bone. That's when you lay it down. That's the most important moment, to say this is the Jubilee year. When you have just the right aim with your sniper rifle and you say, man, this is going to end it. That's when you put it down and walk away.
Amen.
I'm still getting there. I'm quoting somebody who knows what he's doing. That's all. I'm not quoting from personal experience. But I want to be someday. So, I know she will. I know she will. I know she will. I have yet to be able to aim the rifle anyway. So, but let this be the year of Jubilee. Let this be the year of Jubilee in which you say, you know what, I have every right to be angry at that person, I have every right to hate that person, but forget it.
Amen. Thank you, Lord.
I have every right to be hacked off about this, that, and the other, but
Yes.
forget it.
Amen.
Forget it.
Mhm.
Forget it. Let it go.
Mhm.
Let it go for no other reason than you have been released and you have been freed.
Yes, Lord.
And that's when it's time to let go for sure. And most of all, time to let go of yourself. If you are holding that against yourself, you've got to let that go too. And that can be the hardest thing to do.
Amen.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for your love and grace. Thank you for your kindness to us. Thank you for going to the highest of heights for us and the deepest of depths as well. We are grateful for your love,
Amen.
grateful for your Jubilee
Yes.
celebrated over us
Thank you.
and your release. Release us again, release us, bring us further into freedom
Yes.
from our own way of doing things this
Yes,
week.
Lord.
We pray these things in Christ's precious name. Amen.
Amen.